The big picture for this lesson is experiments. So first of all, I want to talk about an experiment. An experiment means you're changing something by either adding or denying and then observing what happens. Now for a fair experiment, you need to have a test group and a control group. So the test group is where you're changing something, and control is not changing. And then you compare and see what happens. So typically you're taking some type of measurement on the test and control group and you're going to get some data. And typically you'd find the average of that data and then compare. So let's say I was doing an experiment on free throw practice. And of course that means you're standing on a basketball court and you're at the free throw line and you're trying to make a basket. So we could have two different groups. We could have the test group, which would be the practice group. So they'd be practicing their free throws, and the control would be no practice. So let's say the average for both groups ahead of time was 45% accuracy for both groups. And then after practice, the new accuracy was 54%. And with no practice, the accuracy was 47%. The data would look like it's showing that practice was increasing the accuracy. But also, you need to get into calculations of margin of error, like how many people. So if you're only using 4 people in the practice group and the no practice group, your margin of error would be plus or minus 1 over square root of 4. And that's the same thing as plus or minus 50%. So if you only have 4 people, you can't really conclude anything because your margin of error is massive. So once again, you would need to reduce your margin of error by doing a larger experiment. And typically, that's how experiments are done. Like for example, vaccines. There's a very small group at first, and they see what happens, then a larger group, then a larger group. So there are 3 phases, and by the 3rd phase, the group is large enough where the margin of error is statistically small, and that way they know the results are more reliable. But they don't use a large group at first because they're not sure what's going to happen to everybody. And another thing for a fair experiment, you only want to change 1 variable at a time. So for example, aside from practicing, what if some people were also changing their diet? Or they're watching videos on how to do a good free throw. So they aren't practicing, but they're doing other things that could affect the results. So that's the big picture for this lesson.